All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Maria Mitchell Association's February Science Speaker. I'm Janelle Gurley, and I'm the Director of Science and Programs at the Maria Mitchell Association. And it is my esteemed privilege to welcome this evening Susan Vizurraga, author of Williamina Fleming, Astronomer, an Imagined Memoir. Before I hand the floor over to Susan this evening, I will share with you the presentation background as well as Susan's background. So, without further ado, we welcome Susan Vizurraga for a discussion of her book, Williamina Fleming, Astronomer, an Imagined Memoir. As one of the Harvard College Observatory's woman computers, Williamina Fleming led a fascinating life. She was an immigrant, a working mother, and an astronomer, and her story will be brought to light in this engaging presentation on the remarkable legacy of a woman who helped transform modern astronomy from behind the scenes. Through Fleming's own imagined voice, Vizurraga explores her journey from domestic servant to internationally respected scientist, her pivotal role in classifying stellar spectra, and her quiet perseverance in a male-dominated field. This talk celebrates Williamina Fleming not only for her scientific achievements, but also for her resilience, curiosity, and lasting impact on how we understand the stars. A former middle school teacher and university instructor, Susan is the author of the picture books Our Old House, a Junior Library Guild selection, and Miss Opal's Auction, a multi-generational selection of the National Council for the Social Studies. She's a volunteer docent at the Georgia Museum of Art and a poll worker with her local elections board. She lives in rural southern Oconee County, Georgia. And it is my esteemed privilege again to welcome Susan this evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really happy to be with you.
And I will turn the floor over to you. And just as a reminder for everyone in attendance, if you have any questions throughout, you can pop them into the Q&A box and I will read them at the end of the presentation in the Q&A section. Susan, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Clear this. Okay. This is my book, Williamina Fleming, Astronomer, and I'll give you a little background into Williamina Mina's life. In the 1800s, mid 1800s, Simon Newcomb, one of the most prominent astronomers, said we are probably nearing the limit of all we can know about astronomy. By 1903, he had changed his mind. He said, what lies before us is an illimitable field, the existence of which was scarcely suspected 10 years ago. The difference between those two statements is a couple of decades and the advent of the new field of astrophotography. Williamina Fleming is the person who cared for the discoveries made with that new technology. And this is her story. She was born in Dundee, Scotland in 1857. That's a port city on the east coast of Scotland. When she was a teacher, she struggled to keep the students' attention because they were often distracted by the smells of burnt sugar and orange because there were marmalade factories near her school. Her father was a gilder, a frame maker, a bit of a tinkerer. He was one of the first in Scotland to use the new technology of the daguerreotype commercially. He was mostly successful, not all the time. There were several advertisements for clearing out all his belongings when he had been bankrupted. But I think his family benefited from his tinkering. When Williamina was a young girl, her ankle was run over by a horse cart, and it was recommended that she have her foot amputated but her father created a boot for her with leather and steel that made it possible for her to walk and to preserve her foot. She was the sixth of nine children. Sorry, the middle of nine children. Only six of them made it past childhood. Eventually, five of the six in her generation ended up in the Boston area. Only one stayed in Scotland. She began teaching school at 14. Her father had died when she was 7. It was a multi-generational household she lived with her parents and her maternal grandparents. Um, the family was struggled a bit. She began teaching at only the age of 14 to help with finances. They took in boarders at times to help with that. She also did some sewing and some millinery work, trimming hats and making dresses. At 20, she married James Orr Fleming, who was a widower um, and a banker in Dundee. In 1878, she and James emigrated to Boston. The plan was for Mina to study accounting. She had always liked math. And he was, we assume, planning to be a banker, which is what he had done in Dundee. However, she fell pregnant. That is how they termed it in those days. You fell pregnant. Um, and he abandoned her. We don't know the circumstances. She never really discussed them, but she did always describe it as having been abandoned. And she shared her desperation. Fortunately, she was able to get a position as a domestic servant in this stately home in Cambridge. And it happened to be the home of um, Edward Charles Pickering Fleming and his wife Lizzie. He was the director of the Harvard College Observatory, and she was the daughter of a former Harvard president. They were active in Boston society. They had no children. But the best thing was that the residence right here was attached to the Harvard College Observatory. Mrs. Pickering tended to the gardens on the campus of the observatory, and Director Pickering actually collected and sold grass clippings from the lawn to help with finance the doings at the observatory. It was the home of the 15-inch Great Refractor, which for the last 20 years had been the largest telescope in the United States. At this time, she worked in the residence, which was this end of the building. There were 4 women who were already employed in various ways in one of these buildings on either side of the observatory, helping the astronomers. Most of them were attached themselves to the astronomers. Mrs. Rogers helped with her husband's reductions. Selina Krantz Bond, who was the daughter of the first HCO director and the sister of the second, worked on the reductions as well. So did Anna Winlock. She began work at the death of her father, who had been the third director of the HCO. And the fourth woman there, Rhoda Saunders, was placed there by President Eliot of Harvard. It wasn't long before Mina showed her employers that she was more than a domestic servant, although she was probably good at that, having been a seamstress and also being a good cook. But they needed help with the reductions, and she knew how to do the math that was necessary to turn the astronomers' observations from the nights before into the precise locations in the sky. And these are some of the calculations that were made in those days in their journals. She was working still part-time in the residence and part-time in the observatory, but with the advent of photography, adding a photographic plate to the telescopes, astronomers were just astonished by how many more stars they discovered in the sky. And Pickering quickly decided he needed to hire more women because he could pay them 25 cents an hour, where he had to pay men 40 cents an hour. And he asked Mina to help plan a women's room to accommodate these women who would be doing not only reductions, but actually looking at these plates as well. However, Mina was pregnant and returned to Scotland to stay with her mother and grandmother and younger brother in about midsummer of that year of 1879. I assume that the Pickerings helped with her expenses on the condition that she return when she was ready. They were planning to, I think, rely on her to supervise the women in the observatory. Her son was born on October 6th, 1879, and she named him Edward Charles Pickering Fleming. She stayed in Dundee until her son was nearly 2. She continued to take in sewing there. The census in 1881 in Scotland listed her as a dressmaker, but Harvard was waiting, and she did then what many immigrants did at the time. She left her son with her mother and her grandmother and her younger brother, and she returned to Cambridge to establish her home for her family. She would not see her son again for another 6 years. She got right to work when she got back to Cambridge. She was now employed by the observatory rather than by the residents, and no longer a domestic servant. Here she is examining plates. This is she right here. She would call out coordinates and a recorder would record. This is probably a posed picture for publicity because they would have had the shades open for the light to come through these light lecterns so that she could see the light through the photographic plates. She was now a supervisor. She did the correspondence for the observatory. She did some of the accounting. She organized all these photographic plates, devised guidelines for how the women should do this work and just to be as uniform as possible. And she hired more women computers. You can see her design work in this room with the wallpaper and the famous astronomers on the wall and the diagram of a star there as well. The astronomers then began adding a prism to the telescope, and that allowed the spectrum of light to shine through. Of course, there is no colored photography yet. So everything is still black and white, and these actually look like they look like today's barcodes, retail barcodes, very small lines. This is a enlargement of these, a little bit later enlargement. Of course, now they can see them in color. They knew that these lines meant something. They were the hydrogen absorption lines. They were still operating under the assumption that stars were made of the same thing that Earth was made of. So what exactly this was still puzzling to them, but Pickering was very anxious to develop a store, a repository of all these plates and all this information that they would somehow, someday understand. Uh, some of the leaders in spectrography were the Drapers, Henry Draper and Anna. And when Mr. Draper passed away, Anna Draper took their vast wealth and store of photographic plates and telescopes and turned to Harvard to help her make sense of what she had and to continue their work. Here she is in the women's computing room, and here's Mina showing her some of the journals and some of the data they're collecting. The Drapers, the Draper Project also financed all these buildings to house the new telescopes on the Harvard Observatory campus. This is still the main building, and the residences down here at this end. And so it's vastly expanded just what Harvard was doing at the time. Mina continued doing the work in the supervising the women in the computing room, working on a new catalog of stars, identifying and classifying those stars, dealing with vendors like the Clarks. These are the Alvin Clark and Sons, working on one of the lenses for a new telescope. Meanwhile, her son arrives. Her mother brought her son to Boston along with two of his cousins who also had stayed behind with Mina's siblings when Mina's siblings also emigrated to the U.S. So she now had the expense of having a son at home and the time in maintaining a household and caring for her son. She took it upon herself to always alert the men that she worked with that when they went home to their wives and their cigars and their leisure time, she was going home to a second job. Here's one of her catalogs. These are all online now and digitized and transcribed through the Phaedra project at Harvard. In 1890, the Draper Catalog of Stellar Spectra was published. This was what she had been working on for 10 years. I think it's over 400 pages of charts like this of specific stars and where they are in the sky. She would have had these all recorded in journals. She would have done the math behind this. She and the other women would have done all the calculations behind this, categorized them, assembled it, made a copy of this entire thing before she would take it to the printer and then have to again prove the printing plates until it was finally published. But this finally, she did get some recognition for her work. The other women there were recognized for numerical computation and clerical work. And Pickering writes in the preface that the greater portion of this work, the measurement and classification of all the spectra and the preparation of the catalog for publication, has been in charge of Mrs. M. Fleming. She got a raise after this, and that allowed her to hire Mary Hegarty, a woman who would come in occasionally to do cooking and housework. There were so many plates now that they had to add a building. This is the brick building that was added to house all of the photographic plates. When it was first built, they apparently Mina was afraid of men carrying crates of plates down the stairs here across. There was a ditch here with a plank across it. And they actually transported them on pulleys and ropes in big boxes. You can just see one hanging here, I think. going across from one building to the other. This is closer to what it looked like later. In 1893, Mina prepares a display to be shown at the Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. She does not attend because she has a 14-year-old son at home at the time and is working on things that she just doesn't think she can leave behind at the observatory. But Professor Pickering, who is the director's brother, delivers her paper there. It's a paper on a field for women's work in astronomy. She recognizes in her work the women who came before her, Caroline Herschel, Mary Somerville, and someone you'll know, Maria Mitchell. She stresses in her paper that astrophotography is a good field for women in astronomy because the plates are evidence. She had been accused a few months earlier of not knowing her facts and not getting her things right in her catalog by two male astronomers who, one, were still not sure that they wanted to rely on photographic plates for any evidence. They questioned any discoveries that had been made without an eye directly to the telescope. And then they also questioned some of her findings. They met together to discuss that, and each of the men realized that they were looking at a different star, and neither of the stars that they were looking at was the star that they were accusing Williamina of having gotten wrong. So she felt that that this field, because the plates were the evidence, though men would doubt you, the photographic evidence would be there for all the world to see. She becomes the authority to whom astronomers around the world write and eventually telephone to say, we have seen something new in the sky. Has anybody ever seen it before? And here she is looking, this is one in 1899, another in 1904. She looks back at her store of plates, of photographic plates, and recalculates and makes sure and writes back to them to tell them there is no evidence of this thing you have seen before. Or sometimes she tells them there's a trace of this, or they're asking for specific information about something. She is the one that they write to, and even when they ask Pickering, he says, we'll consult with Mrs. Fleming because she knows all of these plates. I have this picture in here to remind me to discuss her activities outside of the observatory. She really liked going to the Harvard football games. She continued her work. She raised her son. She welcomed her younger brother, and he lived with her for a while, and his sons. She entertained her friends and colleagues. She was welcome apparently in the parlors of the High Society of Boston, and welcomed and people were comfortable in her more humble home as well. It was written later of her that she was fond of people and excitement. There was no more enthusiastic spectator in the stadium for the football games, no more ardent champion of the Harvard 11. Industrious by nature, she was seldom idle, and long years of observatory work never unfitted her for the domestic side of life. As much at home with the needle as with the magnifying eyepiece, she could make a dainty bag, exquisitely sewed, or dress a doll in complete Scotch Highland costume. She was never too tired to welcome her friends at her home or at the observatory, and with that quality of human sympathy which is sometimes lacking among women engaged in scientific pursuits. I also wanted to uh, remind us that although I'm talking about white women here in the observatory at the turn of the century, there were no women students at Harvard. There were African American students at Harvard, including this gentleman here, whose name was William Henry Lewis. Um, he was a law student at Harvard at the time, and he later became the assistant attorney general under President Taft. He also wrote books about football and uh, helped to change some of the rules to make it. It was apparently extremely violent at the time. Um, it's sort of surprising that it's something that Williamina would have been interested in, but he had some impact as well on the rules of the game. She is of her value to Pickering. This is inside the brick building and the store of plates now. She has a wonderful uh, stacks to store all of these plates. Her value to Pickering is still as an editor of the catalogs, as administrative, as supervisory, as a consultant. But what she wanted most of all was to discover. Every spare minute she had, she was looking at plates to see what she could discover. I wanted to get back to this one. We'll just go here. She was named in 1899, she was named the curator of astronomical plates, the first titled woman at Harvard, and she was now an employee of Harvard University, not just of the observatory. In 1900, at the turn of the century, the uh, powers that be in the university wanted sort of a time capsule, and they asked officers of the university to keep a month's journal of their activities at work and at home. And I think she was overwhelmed by that task. She already had too much to do, but she did it faithfully as long as she could. She starts her journal here, and this really, I really value this document because it gave me so much of her voice and her concerns and her style, that it really helped a lot with my writing of her story. She starts here in the in the astrophotographic building of the observatory. 12 women, including myself, are engaged in the care of the photographs, identification, examination, and measurement of them, reduction of these measurements, and preparation of results for the printer. From day to day, my duties at the observatory are so nearly alike that there will be but little to describe outside ordinary routine of measurement, examination of photographs, and work involved in the reduction of these observations. My home life is necessarily different from that of other officers of the university, since all housekeeping cares rest on me, in addition to those of providing the means to meet their expenses. My son Edward, now a junior in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, knows little or nothing of the value of money, and therefore has the idea but that everything should be forthcoming on demand. I think she sounded here just so much like a modern, contemporary woman that would anyone that any of us might work with. She alternates between what's going on at the observatory and what is going on at home. She, after a night at the theater, she says, Mrs. Bailey, that's the wife of Solon Bailey, the astronomer, tried to persuade me to stop over and dine with her and spend the night, but my little family needs me at home in the morning. They are apt to be late for breakfast and consequently for daily duties, when the head of the house is not there to get them going. At the time, her son is staying with her to save expenses at MIT. His friend is staying with them as well. And Annie Jump Cannon, another of the Harvard women computers who eventually becomes an astronomer in her own right, is also living there because she is the only one of the women computers that is actually allowed to use the telescope. And she goes at night sometimes to use that telescope, which is walking distance from Williamina's home. I'm just going to pick out a few more of the things here. On page 5, she says, before lunch, I found time to examine a few southern spectrum plates and marked a fourth type star and a gaseous nebula, both probably known. Later in the afternoon, I noted a few more interesting objects, among them 2 fourth type stars, 1 gaseous nebula, and several bright line stars. Some of them may be new. This was sort of sort of like the novel in your desk drawer that uh, a lot of office workers have. This is what she likes to do when she has a moment to look at those plates and see what she can find. Here on the last page over here, she writes, the remainder of the afternoon was devoted mainly to Miss Cannon's remarks. This takes more time and concentration of thought than any manuscript I have worked on since we put Miss Maury's volume through the printer's hands. If one could only go on and on with original work, looking for new stars, variables, classifying spectra, and studying their peculiarities and changes, life would be a most beautiful dream. But you come down to its realities when you have to put all that is most interesting to you aside in order to use most of your available time preparing the work of others for publication. However, whatsoever thou puttest thy hand to, do it well. I am more than contented to have such excellent opportunities for work in so many directions, and proud to be considered of any assistance to such a thoroughly capable scientific man as our director. She also relates on another page some of the efficiency studies they're doing. That was sort of a trend at the turn of the century, to see how quickly things were going and to see how if they could be more efficient. She says that 65 comparisons of photographic images are being made with a wedge of shade glass and scale readings given by the observer in 11 minutes. So they are really making sure that they are being efficient with their time as well as getting the work done. She later has a conversation. She says, during the morning's work on correspondence, etc., I had some conversation with the director regarding women's salaries. He seems to think that no work is too much or too hard for me, no matter what the responsibility or how long the hours. But let me raise the question of salary, and I am immediately told that I receive an excellent salary as women's salaries stand. If he would only take some steps to find out how much he is mistaken in regard to this, he would learn a few facts that would open his eyes and set him thinking. Sometimes I feel tempted to give up and let him try someone else or some of the men to do my work in order to have him find out what he is getting for $1,500 a year from me compared with $2,500 a year from some of the other assistants. Does he ever think that I have a home to keep and a family to take care of as well as the men? But I suppose a woman has no claim to such comforts, and this is considered an enlightened age. Remember, she's writing this that all of Harvard is going to see. So I think she's taking a little risk here making these comments in this journal. She also is getting a little testy, I think, because she's getting ill. She's falling ill with the grip, the influenza that is going around. On the March 13th, she says, at breakfast this morning, Edward informed us that Dr. Walker and the other professors in the chemistry department at the Institute are coming to the evening to see the observatory. So she is surprised. This is I guess her version of what many parents have experienced of your child telling you, "Oh, I have to bring cupcakes tomorrow." Um, s- I think she was exasperated and pleased that her son wanted to show her off, but overwhelmed by the amount of work that would mean. She actually does get ill. Uh, Her son takes ill first. She calls the doctor. This is about the middle of the month of March, which is the month that they are keeping track of for this journal of 1900. Um, and everyone in the household, besides Annie Cannon, gets ill. She goes home to her home. Even the servant Mary Haggerty, who's staying with them, stays with them because she's ill. And it's 2 weeks before anyone is well enough to go out and continue the work. So continue their work. So she writes, March 14th to March 20th, my daily duties at the observatory exhausted all my strength each day, and at night I was unable to make any record of the day's work and events. Then eventually she is able to go back to work. Um, and on the last page, she says, Sunday at home with some leisure time to review the events of the past few weeks. All through the winter, I have been fighting colds and overworking, and I do not, uh, let's see, I do not wonder that at last I had to give up. She uh, turns this in, it's the end of the month. I think she probably went back and made a copy of it before she turns this in. She probably also had to read Pickering's version of his month and probably made a copy for him as well. And is a little worried and writes at the bottom here, I find that on March 12th, I have written at considerable length regarding my salary. I do not intend this to reflect on the director's judgment, but feel that it is due to his lack of knowledge regarding the salaries received by women in responsible positions elsewhere. So this, you can see why um, I think this really displays a lot of her personality and her concerns, and a lot of the a good window into, as it was intended, a good window into what life was like for a working woman in 1900. Later in May of that year, there is going to be a solar eclipse, and astronomers all over the world are excited about that. It happens to the path of totality is not going to be close to Harvard, though it is going through a little town in Georgia, which is actually very close to me, um, in Washington, Georgia. And Mrs. Draper, the funder of the whole project, decides that she's going to treat most of the some of the computers to this trip. And this is the group of Harvard women computers on the ship Minia in Boston on their way to Savannah to see the eclipse. Mina is right here in the center. Her son goes as well. He is representing MIT. MIT sets up a camp close to Harvard on a cotton field in Georgia. Mina also knew Captain or First Officer James Adams of the Minia. He was had invited her um, to be on his. He's going to go to Paris to the expedition, and then in the next year, and they've been discussing things that she can send along with him for that exhibition. This ship, in fact, 12 years later, um, helps to recover the victims of the Titanic disaster. It was a cable laying ship, laying telegraphic cable across the ocean. These are from the newspapers in Boston, actually, the Boston reporters who visited um, that cotton field in Georgia. They have a good good seeing that day. However, the telescopes get jostled as they are just at the most inopportune times. So that while they have some good readings, they do not have very good photographs. They do, though, have a nice barbecue with the Wilkes County Literary Society the next day before they head back home. The next year, Edward graduates from MIT. He was not really an athlete. This is him. I think this is more of a intramural, but these are the one of the few photographs I could find of him. And he was also on his class football team. He is now has an engineering degree in mining, and he is going out to Utah to work for the Copper Queen Project as a metallurgist. Mina continues working on her own. She is ever the scientist and the documentarian. When she is awoken at night, one night in March of 1904 by an earthquake, she grabs an envelope and jots down her sensations so that she can stick this envelope into the journal the next day and transcribe her what she experienced. And of course, this might affect some of the data from that night the next day in the at the observatory. So she writes, house shook distinctly 3 times, the first being most notable, and the time between each vibration being about 2 seconds. Not the slightest sound of windstorm heard, which would account for the trembling. The sensation was similar to that of crossing in a rowboat, the waves in the wake of a steamer, taking them head on, not broadside, and riding over them, getting 3 pulsations, of which the first was very strongly felt, and the last a passing away. She even makes a little diagram to illustrate. In 1907, she becomes a citizen of the United States, and this is one of the first times she describes herself as an astronomer. On the census before that, other forms that she has filled out, she just lists observatory or Harvard as her employer or employment. But now she is actually describing herself as an astronomer, and Pickering and Solon Bailey astronomers are her witnesses. She probably trimmed her own hat here at Harvard. This is called the hat picture. Pickering realizes, oh, it's a good thing to have women working at the observatory, and they bring in a lot of interest to the observatory. So he encourages some publicity. Here is some of the publicity from the time. I particularly like this one over here that says, yet today in the Harvard Observatory at Cambridge, Mass, there is a woman whose one business it is to mark down those new stars, those appearing and vanishing suns, those jacks in the box of astronomy, which it takes telescope, microscope, photography, and spectroscope combined to identify. She is Mrs. Williamina Fleming, the world's most famous woman astronomer, who has just discovered her 10th new star and has overwhelmingly demonstrated her right to be known in astronomy as the Sherlock Holmes of the heavens. Since the reading public was anxiously awaiting each new installment of the Sherlock Holmes stories at the time, I think this was really hitting the big time. However, over here it says she is a curator at Harvard, has been made a fellow by many universities. She likes housework too. In 1909, she does go to Chicago to present a paper at a convention of the Astronomical Association. This is she right here. Her paper is on the spectrum of a meteor. You can notice that she is always very conservatively dressed. The other women are in their much less restrictive shirtwaists, even though she's not much older than most of these women. This is Henrietta Leavitt here, and Pickering is right here. 2 more women from the Observatory also deliver papers at this. This is the Yerkes Observatory in Chicago. She goes on from there to visit her son in Utah. In the next year, the next summer, the Astrophysical Society and Harvard decide to put together a American version of the Grand European Tour for astronomers to visit major observatories in the United States. And it's going to begin at Harvard. They're going to travel by train. Williamina does a lot of the planning for this. They go to Blue Hill, Wellesley, Niagara Falls, Chicago, Flagstaff in the Arizona Territory, the Grand Canyon, Pasadena, Mount Wilson, and some will also go on to the Lick Observatory. This again is Mina right here, again in the conservative dress. This is Henrietta Leavitt, becomes a prominent astronomer later. I believe this is Annie Jump Cannon right here. And this looks like Edward again. He may have been home for a few weeks or something. I'm not sure why he is there, or I might be mistaken. It might not be him, but it sure looks like him. This is the end of the trip at the top of Mount Wilson, and you can see all these men, astronomers from around the world are here to see Hale. This is Hale's spectroheliograph being built at the top of Mount Wilson. They're all camping out there in tents and in cabins for several days of discussions and nights at the telescopes. Williamina and this other woman here are the only two women there. She is actually the wife of Kapteyn, this astronomer right here. Here's George Hale. Here's Pickering again, and here is Williamina Fleming. And she probably sewed that bag she has in her hand right there as well. I didn't put this one in the book. I didn't think she would appreciate this picture of herself. She looks pretty worn out. It's been about 2 weeks since they left Harvard, and that hat probably weighs about 5 pounds just by itself. And it's hot, and they're on the trail up and down the mountain, which they are either riding on burros or being hauled up in wagons. And I think by this time she might have just about had enough. She goes on from here to visit her son in Salt Lake City. And while she's there, she gets a telegram that her mother has passed away on the East Coast. So she leaves early. She does not go with the other astronomers onto the Lick Observatory, and gets, after a period of bereavement with her family, she goes right back to work and spends the next 6 months doing what she always has done. In December, she receives a medal from the Astronomical Society of Mexico. She starts feeling ill. In May, she enters the hospital. She's diagnosed with pneumonia, and she is there for 2 weeks before finally succumbing to her illness and passes away on May 21st, 1911. Her passing is noted all around the world. This is a scrapbook put together contemporaneously at Harvard. All the notices in various newspapers. She's remembered for all the women she worked with. These are all women that were women computers along and were supervised at some time by Williamina Fleming, including Miss Cannon, Miss Antonia Maury, Miss Henrietta Swan Leavitt, Miss Margaret Harwood, who I believe becomes the first director of the Maria Mitchell Observatory. She's remembered for discovering the Horsehead Nebula on this photographic plate. This is all she could see of it at the time that she noted. And of course, we have a much, much better pictures of it today, thanks to our more contemporary technology. Also, some of the things that she did discover that were credited to other people are now credited to Williamina Fleming. This is the um, triangular wisp in the Veil Nebula. It is now called Fleming's triangular wisp. There is a crater on the far side of the moon named for her. It's actually named for her and another Fleming, Alexander Fleming, who is a Nobel Prize winning microbiologist, I believe. And many asteroids and other ob objects are in space are named for her. Um, as an astronomer, this is a remembrance written in the Royal Astronomical Society. As an astronomer, Mrs. Fleming was somewhat exceptional in being a woman, and in putting her work alongside that of others, it would be unjust not to remember that she left her daily labors at the observatory to undertake on her return home those household cares of which a man usually expects to be relieved. She was fully equal to the double task, as those who have had the good fortune to be her guests can testify, and it is probably worthy of record as indicating how lightly the double burden sat on her, that she yielded to none in her enjoyment of a football match, especially a match between Harvard and Yale. She certainly made her mark on astronomy, um, and on and on the man that was one of her male colleagues that wrote that obituary for her. So I think she was effective in raising the consciousness of some men that she worked with that she had a lot more responsibility than many of them did outside of the observatory. My book is an imagined memoir. I have tried to be faithful to her character and her concerns and her voice, and have used some of her own words in telling her story. I've just tried to set actual events in her life in the context um, of her times. And I think with that, I can turn it back to you, Janelle.
Thank you, Susan. What a wonderful recap of Wilhelmina's history and her contributions, of course. I just want to brief you that we had a couple of questions or one
Okay.
particular question in the Q&A that came up while you were presenting, and we resolved it
Oh,
in
okay.
the moderation. But Susan earlier asked, wasn't Carolina Herschel married to astronomer William Herschel, and didn't she help with the discovery of Uranus? And Roy, another guest in the chat, did, before I got to it, was able to say and allude to Carolina, sorry, being William's sister. And I added that she did indirectly help with Uranus's discovery as well, just with her meticulous
Right.
record keeping amongst everything else that she contributed.
Right. I believe that's the case. Right.
Yes. And there was a question as well from Susan asking if one of the is Maria Mitchell's photograph, rather, one of the ones that was on the wall earlier in the presentation.
I don't know. I haven't could not get any closer to see than you saw. So I didn't recognize it, but it very well might have been. They overlap just a bit
Mm-hmm.
at the uh, at the beginning of Williamina's career and at the end of Maria Mitchell's career.
Mm-hmm.
They probably knew a lot of the same people, but I couldn't find um, any evidence that they had actually met personally.
Got it. Thank you for that. An anonymous attendee asks, are the photographic plates still at Harvard? Do you know?
There, the science library at Harvard is now closed. It was the I can't. It starts with an H. I can't. It's just left me right now. It's all part of the Smithsonian now,
Yep.
but you can access the plates themselves, and the journals are online and transcribed and digitized, so they're very accessible.
Thank you. And I had a couple questions for you. And
Uh-huh.
again, at home, if anyone has any provocative questions or just thoughtful questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and I'm more than happy to share them out loud. You chose to tell Williamina Fleming's story in her own imagined voice. What did that narrative choice allow you to explore that a traditional biography might not?
Well, I think it gets a little more at how I tried to get a little more at how she would have felt. I projected really extrapolated from her actual words to if she felt this way about this, how would she feel about this? And tried to imagine her in those situations. There's no evidence of what her life was like
Mm-hmm.
um, in between things. The time when she's in Scotland is sort of a black hole, except for stories that she told people later. She corresponded with the Carnegies and their daughter. They're soliciting funds from Andrew Carnegie, who is also a Scotsman.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were trying to play that angle to maybe get some more funds from the Carnegies. She actually becomes friends with their daughter, and that is in her drafts of the letters that she wrote to little Margaret Carnegie. I get That's where I got most of the information about what she was like as a child, because she's relating things that were common to her and Margaret. So um, I I think I like I like well researched historical fiction, because I
Mm-hmm.
think you get a much better whole picture of what life would have been like, rather than just dry facts and dates, because there's just so much more than what is on a particular page of history.
And that summary, rather, reviews, it segues perfectly into my follow-up question. The women computers at Harvard transform astronomy, yet so much of their labor was invisible for decades. How did you approach writing about scientific work that was both meticulous and revolutionary, but historically undercredited? What was your process in telling that
Um,
juxtaposition?
yeah, well, I tried to. Um, she Because she had to learn it herself and educate herself about what she was doing. She had no background in this. She was plunked into this women's work
Mhm.
that the other women had, um, who were previously were doing some of this, had been raised in astronomy. They had
Mhm.
brothers, sons, etc., who did that work. She didn't have any of that background, so she is coming to it really fresh and just learning it. And I think she is um, just in wonder of what is out there and what other people have seen that she had not thought of before. So I tried to convey some of that, as well as the tedium. There's just a lot. There's actually one point that I do have in the book that I didn't relate in the presentation tonight. Um, There's a an outpost of the observatory in Arequipa, Peru, and they are sending plates from the southern skies, and they there seems to be a delay in getting them, and there's so much out there that they're anxious to look at. She goes to the director and says, why aren't we getting the plates in a timely fashion? We know. And he says, well, the astronomers there um, have been doing the work. They want to look at it themselves and see if there's anything there. And she basically just puts her foot down and says, our work is so tedious and so much the same every day. Please don't take this one thing from us. Don't take this um, discovery away from us. And he relents, and he says they will, occasionally look at the plates when they have observed something in particular in Peru, but they'll continue to send them. So she's sort of convinced him that they need those small rewards
Mhm.
occasionally to go with all the tedious work that they do. And they're working basically 9 to 6, 6 days a week.
Right.
Um, so they are. This is just a lot of work.
And then for her, she had her 6 to 11, we'll call it, till
Exactly right.
bedtime.
Right.
Roy asks, do we know what happened to James or Fleming?
No, we don't. There were, I've followed several James Flemings down several rabbit holes, and several other people have done this, including what is remains of the family, the descendants of the Stevens family. Um, our best guess is that he returned at some point to Scotland and passed away fairly just several years after they separated. Um, yeah, we can't tell for sure. She doesn't ever really discuss him or give any hints, although by the time Edward applies for his citizenship, he lists his father as deceased. She never divorces him. In fact, I think part of her always wearing dark clothes was that it would just be easier if people thought she was a widow. Um, but so I don't think, I think she probably didn't know and didn't want to pursue it, but I suspect her one sister who stayed in Scotland probably found out from his extended family or something what had eventually happened to him. But I haven't discovered anything where she discusses that.
So interesting. And I had one more for you. What surprised you the most about Wilhelmina in doing your extensive research?
I think what surprised me the most and what really made me decide I wanted to write about her was how I read some of the things she wrote, and I just thought, oh, this if she were here today, she we would be best friends. I just really like how much I liked her, um,
Mhm.
and how really everlasting her voice seems to me. That it is that people today, women today especially, still face a lot of the same difficulties she faced at the time.
Anonymous attendee asks, what became of Edward after his mother passed? That one just came in.
He was working in Chile at the time for in a copper in among the copper mines. So he did not make it back for her death.
Mm.
He continues that. He works in Mexico some. He marries sort of late, and then his first wife passes away, and he eventually marries again a bit later. He has a daughter, but I think he's around almost 50 when she is born. So she never knew him very much. I actually corresponded with her through Ancestry. Um, I think she's elderly. And I tried to send her a copy of the book and I haven't been able to get in touch with her. I hope she's still okay. But he died when she was just a young child. And then I think she was raised mostly by her mother's family who had never met Mina. So,
Oh.
and probably may not have even known what she did for a living. So, um, uh, she she was helpful but had no real information. She was interested but had no real information about the family.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. What question did we not ask you that you hope that someone touched on this evening, if there's any, or anything you'd like to share with us and impart upon us about Mina, about her work, her time on this earth?
Um, I couldn't I couldn't say. Let me just read a page, and I'll give you an idea what the book feels like. Um, Here's just a short piece from when she first is at the observatory, and this is Observatory 1879. I had thought of a telescope as the toy my brothers held to their eyes while playing pirates on the docks at Dundee. searching the horizon for ships and sails and shapes in the storm clouds. But here in the Harvard College Observatory, there is a great dome, and inside it, a telescope large enough to dwarf a man, a machine of brass and gears and glass, polished wood and iron rails, a chair like a sleigh with cogs and pulleys and weights, a sliver of the concave ceiling sliding open to reveal a slice of the clear night sky. What a wonder it is. That's just a feel for how I tried to translate her voice
Mm-hmm.
into what she did.
Well, I am sad that I didn't read before, but it's definitely now at the top of my must read list. Not should read, definitely on my must read list. And I would look forward to corresponding with you more offline after I read,
Okay.
because I know I'm going to have so many more questions. But I just wanted to share that we had Chelsea in the chat sharing very fascinating story in history, with records often being handwritten. What happens if needed records are not legible? Can it be analyzed in a particular way? And if so, what does that look like if you know? She also said, thanks for the talk, Susan.
Thank you. I don't know what technology. I'm sure they're using some kind of AI stuff to figure a lot of this out now, but I think there are many repositories of um, original documents in cursive and in the handwriting of that time are employing armies of volunteers who just go through and transcribe. And they even call out, if you can read cursive, because there aren't as many people today who can read cursive, um, help us transcribe some of these. And they have a whole system to do that and to write these things in. I think a lot of it is just predictive, knowing what probably would they have said, and then that the F looks weird,
Yep.
it looks like an S, and that sort of thing. You get used to that. So I really like looking at that old handwriting and the original documents. And I just read the other day that someone has found um what is it uh one of the foundational astronomy texts that has marginalia written in Galileo's own hand. So
Okay.
that's a real a really interesting discovery, and someone recognizes Galileo's own script in the
Right.
in the margins.
No, to your point, and also having been a former educator myself, cursive is quickly becoming a much more lost art. And it's
Mhm.
astounding how many kids today cannot read cursive. And I think it is critical because thinking of primary documents and sources, it's closing them off from an entire period of history,
Mhm.
really, and their history. Um, Diane said, kind of off topic, but is it really hard to get people who read cursive? Ties in
um,
perfectly with what we're chatting
Well,
about.
I was also a school teacher. I taught learning disabled kids for a while too, so
Mhm.
I'm very good at deciphering
Mhm.
um, uh, a lot of things that don't look like anything, cursive or print. But yeah, I guess it is hard. I'm surprised
Mhm.
because it's no labor for me to read cursive, but
Mhm.
I learned to write it, so
Right.
I guess that's why.
And also, it's the introduction, Diana can add a little bit to that, the introduction of technology so much earlier in the classrooms. Kids who are, for instance, here in Nantucket, they get a Chromebook, I want to say, in intermediate school, so between third and fifth grade. So they're, as I call it, clicky clacking much more than they're writing on paper.
Mhm.
So any opportunities that we can get, especially, and this is what part of our mission at Maria Mitchell is the hands-on learning by doing. So any opportunity we get for kids in our community and beyond to work with their hands and to do some more of those tactile processes, especially things like writing. It's so critical just for keeping their brains really wired and tapped into everything. And that's my scientific and personal opinion. But Jackie, our director of astronomy at Maria Mitchell, said, thank you so much for telling her story and bringing it to life. Amazing. And she may or may not have texted me as well. just saying that this is so amazing. So I echo those sentiments, and I am so grateful for you taking the time to present this evening for us at our Science Speaker Series. Is there anything you'd like to share before we let everyone go eat dinner, late dinner?
No, I really appreciate the audience. I know that there's not, this is rather a niche little story that it's nice to find people that are like-minded, that are interested in her story. I told my husband, I think my audience is the 10th grade girl doing an extra credit science book report. So that's a very narrow audience, but
Yeah.
I do enjoy getting her story out there. I'm uh, just sorry I didn't run into her earlier.
hmm And, likewise, but now what we can do is continue to tell her story and
Right.
be, a lamplight for her story as well, if not a telescopic light.
Sorry.
And Jim also wanted to add that this was a great presentation. Thank you so much. And again, I echo those sentiments. Susan, thank you so much. It's been a privilege and an honor to host you this evening for our February Science Speaker Series. And I look forward to learning more from you and hearing more from you in the near future.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. And with that, everyone, we conclude this evening's Science Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us. And that's a wrap.